I'm David Smith. I'm the director of the Kai's Institute for Christian Teaching and Learning at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Right now I'm in the ecosystem preserve that's part of the university campus, just by the Bunker Interpretive Center where environmental education programs take place. And this seemed like an appropriate place to talk about a Kai's Institute project from a few years ago that focused on the role of Christian imagination in reimagining how teaching and learning happens in classrooms. The resulting book that came out of this project was called Teaching and Christian Imagination. In the title of the book there, Teaching and Christian Imagination, we sometimes associate imagination with making stuff up, right? Imagined things are things that aren't real. Fairies, hobbits, galaxies a long time ago and far, far away. But that's not all of what imagination's about. Imagination has also to do with the way in which we make sense of the world, the way in which we try to build a coherent picture of our surroundings and how we're supposed to act in our surroundings. The stories, the images we have at the back of our mind, the ways we have of interpreting the world that we live in, they shape how we decide to act, what we decide to do next. And over time, as Christians have been involved in education, their imagination about teaching and learning, the way they imagine what to do next in a classroom, has been shaped by an array of biblical and theological images. And that's what we wanted to investigate a little more in the book. So we drew together an interdisciplinary team and we looked at a whole series of biblical and theological images that have influenced education. So for example, here's a commonplace one. We talk about the early stages of learning using the word kindergarten. It's a German word. Kinder means children, Garten means garden. So it's a children's garden. Now, why would we talk about the first classroom for small children as being a children's garden? Well, it turns out there's a long history to that word. It goes back through Friedrich Froebel, an educator who's associated with the term kindergarten, but it goes back much further than that. So, for example, in the 17th century, there's a Moravian bishop called John Comenius, who was quite influential in his attempts to rethink modern Western education. And he says repeatedly throughout his writings that schools should be gardens of delight, classrooms should be gardens of delight, teachers should be gardens of delight. And when he says this, he's drawing on a rich tradition of theological reflection. Because it turns out the Bible's full of gardens. There's a garden in Genesis that is associated with beauty, with the wonder of what was created, but also with fateful decisions, with moral and spiritual drama. And there are gardens later in the prophets. So Isaiah, for instance, he says, you will be like a well-watered garden, which sounds like a nice promise of spiritual refreshment, but it's in the context of a call to spend yourself on behalf of the hungry and seek freedom for the oppressed. So gardens in the prophets become associated with justice, with flourishing, with the kind of society that we build. Gardens appear in the wisdom literature. There are lots of trees in the Psalms and that are associated with the ways in which we grow and the ways in which our relationship with God and the world takes shape. So for someone like Comenius, who spent a lot of time reflecting on Scripture, and he's got all these images at the back of his mind of different gardens and trees in Scripture that are associated with beauty, with generosity, with spiritual growth, with moral decisions, with justice, with community building. And then someone like that says classrooms should be like gardens. How does that start to steer his imagination? How would it start to steer your imagination if you thought of your classroom as needing to be like a garden of delight, and you thought of a garden of delight as a place that's connected with justice, beauty, generosity, spiritual growth, moral decisions? That's the kind of question that comes out of looking at the history of how Christians have imagined teaching and learning. Now, we brought together a cluster of scholars across different disciplines who all participated in this project, but we didn't want to write just a history of what happened in the past. We wanted to get at how present-day Christian educators can let their imaginations be enriched by encountering all this rich imagining that has gone on in the past. So in the book we included some historical stories, but we also included stories out of present-day classrooms, examples of teachers trying to grapple with the same questions. We included poems, we included paintings, we included biblical meditations, because we wanted to create a kind of reading that wasn't just gaining more information, but was the kind of thing that you could dip into, think about for a while, go maybe change something in your classroom and come back 2 months later and read a bit more and think about it again from another angle. So the book Teaching and Christian Imagination we built up out of a whole series of different kinds of vignettes trying to provoke the imagination in different ways, but to connect the ways we imagine classrooms back to the riches that are present in the biblical and theological tradition as Christians have tried to imagine education in fruitful ways.